There are moments that change a life. Most of them don't announce themselves. They walk up quiet in boots too big and knock on your door on a Tuesday afternoon when you've stopped believing in miracles. This is the story of one such moment, and of the man who thought he was done living until a boy asked him for water. Jacob Morrison stood at the edge of his property where the fence met the horizon, staring at the creek bed that had gone from river to trickle to dust in the space of 3 months. The Montana summer of 1884 had arrived like a punishment from God himself, all heat and drought and cattle dying slow in fields that used to run green. 47 years old, alone, again. He gripped the fence post with hands that bore the scars of 3 decades of ranch work, calluses on calluses, scars from wire, from branding irons, from life itself. The wood was hot enough to burn, but Jacob didn't let go. Pain was good. Pain was real. Pain was the only thing that reminded him he was still breathing. Behind him, the ranch house sat empty. 200 yards of weathered wood and memories he couldn't escape. Sarah had loved that house, had scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, had hung curtains in every window, had filled the rooms with laughter and the smell of bread baking and the sound of their son's footsteps running from room to room. All of that was gone now, 3 years gone. Jacob looked up at the sky, cloudless and cruel, and spoke aloud to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore. Lord, I know I ain't talked to you in 3 years, not since Sarah and little Matthew passed, not since the fever took them both in the same week. I ain't asking for myself, but these cattle, they're dying. The land's dying. If you're still listening, send rain, or send me the strength to walk away from all this. The sky gave no answer. It never did. He turned from the fence and walked back toward the house, boots kicking up dust with every step. Dusty, his sorrel mare, watched him from the corral with patient eyes. She was the only living thing on this ranch that depended on him now. The cattle would be sold off by month's end. There was no keeping them alive in this heat, not with the wells running low and the creek gone dry. The house waited. It always waited. Inside, everything was exactly as Sarah had left it. Jacob had frozen the place in time, like a shrine to what he'd lost. Her apron still hung on the hook by the stove. Her sewing basket sat beside her chair. The plates she'd chosen, painted with tiny blue flowers, lined the shelf, gathering dust. And in the corner, untouched for 3 years, was Matthew's room. Jacob stood in the doorway and looked at the small bed made up tight with military corners, at the wooden toys frozen mid-play, at the rope swing visible through the window that hung motionless in the dead air. 5 years old, that's all the time God had given him with his son. 5 years of watching Matthew grow from baby to boy. 5 years of teaching him to ride to rope, to be kind to animals and honest with people. 5 years of bedtime stories and morning laughter and the absolute certainty that nothing in this world could hurt worse than loving someone that much. Then the fever came, Sarah first, then Matthew, then the doctor shaking his head and saying the words Jacob still heard in nightmares. I'm sorry, Jacob. The fever's too strong. There's nothing more I can do. He'd held Sarah's hand as the life left her body. She'd looked at him with eyes that were already seeing beyond this world and whispered her last words. Take care of our boy. But by the time morning came, there was no boy left to take care of. Jacob closed the door to Matthew's room and walked through the house that had become a tomb. He ate beans straight from the can, standing at the counter, because sitting at the table alone was worse than not eating at all. He washed his single plate and put it back on the shelf with all the others that would never be used. Then he walked outside to check the well. The water level had dropped another 6 inches since yesterday. At this rate, he'd be dry in 2 weeks, maybe less. He filled a single canteen and rationed it like gold. 1 sip in the morning, 1 at midday, 1 at night. The cattle got what was left divided among 50 head that should have been twice that number before the drought killed half the herd. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, Jacob sat on his porch and watched the light change. Sarah had loved sunsets, had made him stop whatever he was doing to come watch the sky turn colors she'd describe in words he never quite understood. Amber, crimson, violet. To Jacob it was just the sun going down, same as it did every day. Same as it would tomorrow and every day after, until he joined Sarah and Matthew in the ground. He didn't pray before bed. Hadn't in 3 years. What was the point? God had taken everything that mattered. Prayer was just talking to silence. The knock came at 4 in the afternoon the next day. Jacob was in the barn, mucking out Dusty's stall with the kind of methodical focus that came from having nothing else to think about. The work was simple, repetitive. It kept his hands busy and his mind empty. The knock came again, louder this time. Jacob set down the pitchfork and walked toward the house, squinting against the brutal sunlight. Visitors were rare. Most folks in Redemption Valley had learned over the past 3 years that Jacob Morrison preferred solitude to company. But when he opened the door, he didn't find an adult. He found a child, a boy, 9 years old maybe. Thin as a fence post with brown hair that stuck up in the back and gray eyes that held too much worry for a child's face. He wore a shirt 3 sizes too large, pants held up with rope instead of a proper belt, and boots that were so oversized they looked almost comical. Almost. There was nothing funny about the way the boy stood swaying slightly from exhaustion but refusing to sit down. Nothing funny about the tear tracks cutting lines through the dust on his face. Nothing funny about the way his hands were balled into fists, shaking with the effort of holding himself together. The boy looked at Jacob and spoke in a voice that cracked but didn't break. "Mister, my name's Finn Parker. My little sister Rose is dying of fever. My mama can't get her cool because our creek dried up yesterday. I walked 2 hours to find you because the map at the general store said you got a well. I ain't got money. But I'm begging you, please, just water. That's all, just water to save my sister." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. Little sister. Dying. Fever. His hand gripped the door frame so hard splinters drove into his palm. He stared at this boy in boots too big, and saw for just a moment Matthew wearing Jacob's own boots around the house, clomping and laughing and pretending to be a grown man. He heard the word fever and remembered the sound of Matthew's labored breathing in that final night. He saw the desperation in Finn's eyes and recognized it because he'd worn that same desperation on his own face 3 years ago, when he'd begged God for a miracle that never came. Every instinct told him to close the door, to protect himself, to say no because getting involved meant caring, and caring meant the possibility of loss, and loss was the one thing Jacob Morrison could not survive again. But he didn't close the door. Instead, he heard himself ask a question. "How old's your sister?" Finn's voice trembled when he answered. 4, nearly 5. Her birthday's next month if she makes it. 4, nearly 5. Matthew had been 5. Something cracked inside Jacob's chest. Not broke. He'd been broken for 3 years. This was different. This was the sound of something frozen beginning to thaw. "Wait here," Jacob said. He turned and walked into the house, moving with sudden purpose. He grabbed every canteen he owned, 4 of them. He grabbed both water jugs, the heavy ceramic ones Sarah had used for canning. He grabbed his medical kit, the one with fever powder and clean cloth, and the herbs Doc Garrett had left 3 years too late. He grabbed dried meat and bread and an extra blanket because if the family was living rough, they'd need more than just water. When he came back to the door, Finn was still standing exactly where Jacob had left him, swaying on his feet but refusing to show weakness. Jacob handed him one of the lighter canteens. "Drink," he said. "You walked 2 hours in this heat. You're no good to your sister if you collapse." Finn took the canteen but didn't drink. "You're giving me water." His voice held suspicion underneath the hope. "I'm giving your sister water. You're just the delivery boy. Now drink." Finn drank. Small sips at first, then longer ones, his body betraying how desperately thirsty he'd been. Jacob loaded the rest of the supplies into a pack and slung it over his shoulder. "Show me where they are." But Finn didn't move. He stood there, canteen in hand, studying Jacob's face with the careful wariness of a child who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted. "Why you helping?" Finn asked. "What do you want?" "I don't want nothing but to see that little girl cool down." "Mama says strangers don't help without a price." Jacob's jaw tightened. This boy's mother had been hurt before, badly enough to teach her son that kindness always came with a cost. "Your mama's been hurt before, I reckon," Jacob said quietly. "I ain't looking to hurt nobody. I just had a son once, nearly your age. He died of fever because I couldn't save him. Maybe I can save your sister." The truth hung in the air between them. Finn searched Jacob's face for a long 10 seconds. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay, but if you try anything to hurt Mama or Rose, I'll stop you." The threat would have been laughable coming from a 9-year-old boy if it hadn't been delivered with such fierce conviction. "You'll protect them," Jacob said. "I know. That's what good brothers do." Something in Finn's face shifted. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. "Come on," Finn said. "It's 2 hours back. Can you walk that far?" Jacob looked at this boy who'd already walked 4 hours in boots that didn't fit, asking for help for a sister he was trying to save. "Son, I'd walk through hell itself if there's a child needing help at the end." Finn nodded once. Then he turned and started walking. Jacob followed. They walked east, away from the ranch and into territory Jacob rarely traveled. The land here was rougher, all rocks and scrub brush and dried grass that crunched underfoot. The sun beat down without mercy, and within 20 minutes Jacob's shirt was soaked through with sweat. But Finn kept walking. The 2 big boots rubbed blisters with every step Jacob could tell from the way the boy favored his left foot, but Finn never slowed down, never complained, just kept moving forward with the grim determination of someone who knew stopping meant failure. After a while, Jacob broke the silence. "Those boots," he said, "they were your daddy's." It wasn't a question. Finn didn't look back when he answered. "Yes, sir." "Where's your daddy now?" "Dead. Railroad accident 2 years back. Crushed under a freight car when the brake failed." The words were delivered flat, emotionless, the way a child speaks when the pain is too big to show. "I'm sorry, son. Mama don't talk about him much. Says it hurts too much to remember, but I remember. He used to carry Rose on his shoulders and sing her the lullaby about the mockingbird. Made her laugh every time." Jacob's throat tightened. He'd sung to Matthew too. Silly songs that made no sense but made his son giggle. "My boy," Jacob said quietly, "Matthew. I used to sing to him too." Finn glanced back just for a moment, and something passed between them. An understanding, a shared grief. They walked in silence for another mile. Then Finn spoke again, and this time his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "After Daddy died, things got hard. We had a house in town but couldn't pay rent. Mama tried sewing washing clothes, anything she could find. But Rose got sick last winter, not fever, just a cough, and Mama spent all our money on the doctor. Then we got evicted." "Where'd you go?" "Nowhere, everywhere. We've been moving camp to camp for 8 months. Mama finds work where she can. I trap rabbits. Rose just tries to stay out the way and not be trouble, even though she's never trouble." 8 months. This child had been homeless for 8 months, walking in dead man's boots, trying to keep his family alive. "There's a lady been looking for us," Finn said, and something in his tone made Jacob pay closer attention. "Daddy's mother, Grandma Iris. She lives in Boston. Got money, big house, everything we don't have. She wrote Mama letters saying she wants to take Rose and me, give us proper upbringing." "Why didn't your mama go?" Finn's voice turned bitter. "Grandma Iris said Mama ain't fit. Said Daddy married beneath himself. Said she'd take us kids but not Mama. Said families don't work that way, but Mama said yes, they do. Mama said we're a family and families don't split." Jacob felt anger kindle in his chest. A grandmother who'd try to separate children from their mother wasn't family. She was something else entirely. "Your mama's right," Jacob said firmly. "A rich house ain't a home if it don't got love in it. Your mama loves you." More than anything. Then you're already rich, son. Finn turned around, walking backward for a few steps so he could look at Jacob's face. You really believe that? I know it. I had love once, lost it. And I'd give everything I own, every acre of land, every head of cattle, just to have one more day with the people I loved. Money can't buy that. Never could. Finn studied him for a long moment, then nodded and turned back around. They crested a small rise, and Finn pointed to a hollow below where scrub trees provided minimal shade. There, he said. That's where we've been staying. Jacob looked down and felt his heart sink. It wasn't a tent. It was worse. An abandoned railroad line shack, half collapsed and patched with whatever materials the family had been able to scavenge. Canvas stretched across gaps where walls should have been. Boards nailed at odd angles to keep the roof from caving in completely. A small fire pit outside, cold and empty because there was no wood to burn. And hanging on a makeshift clothesline between two posts were 3 items: 1 woman's dress, 1 child's dress, 1 pair of pants small enough to belong to Finn, everything this family owned hanging in the sun. Come on, Finn said, and started down the hill. Before they'd made it halfway, a woman appeared in the doorway of the shack. She was thin, too thin. The kind of thin that came from giving food to children and pretending you'd already eaten. Red blonde hair escaped from a braid that had come half undone. Her dress, the one that wasn't hanging on the line, was worn but clean. She had pride. Jacob could see that immediately. She also had fear. The moment she saw Jacob, her whole body went rigid. She stepped out of the shack and placed herself directly between the doorway and this stranger, the way a mother bear puts herself between a threat and her cubs. Finn. Her voice cut through the air like a whip. What did you do? Finn stopped walking. His shoulders came up defensive. I got help, Mama. Rose needs water and he's got it. I told you we don't take help from strangers. I told you we don't trust nobody we don't know. But Mama, Rose is burning up, and our creek is dust, and you've been kneeling there 6 hours pretending that dry rag is doing something when we both know it ain't. The woman Clara Jacob realized her name must be Clara Parker, looked at her son with an expression that held anger and fear and desperate love all tangled together. Then she looked at Jacob. Her eyes did the calculation in seconds. Could she grab Rose and run? Which direction? How fast could she move carrying a sick 4-year-old? Could she outrun a healthy man? The answer was no, and she knew it. Her jaw tightened until the muscles stood out like wire. Jacob raised both hands slowly, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. Ma'am, my name's Jacob Morrison. I own the ranch west of here. Your boy walked 2 hours in this heat to ask for water. I got water medicine and clean cloth. I ain't here to hurt nobody. I'm just here to help a sick little girl. Clara's eyes narrowed. What do you want? Not a thing. Nobody helps for free. Then I'll be the first. They stared at each other across 10 feet of dusty ground. 2 people who'd both learned the hard way that the world took more than it gave. 2 people who'd been hurt enough to build walls. Then from inside the shack came a small voice that changed everything. Mama, I'm thirsty. Clara's face crumbled. Every defense, every wall, every bit of protective anger collapsed in the space of a heartbeat. What was left was just a mother terrified, desperate, out of options. But she still didn't move aside. If I let you help, she said, voice shaking, and if Rose gets better, can you keep a secret? Jacob's instincts prickled. Depends on the secret. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled letter. She handed it to Jacob with shaking hands. The letterhead read, Attorney at Law, Boston, Massachusetts. Jacob scanned the contents. Legal language. Custody petition. The name Iris Montgomery appeared 3 times. And at the bottom in formal script, Mrs. Clara Parker is hereby notified that proceedings have been filed in Montana Territorial Court to remove minor children, Finn Parker and Rose Parker, from her custody on grounds of inadequate provision and care. Jacob looked up from the letter. Your husband's mother is trying to take your children. She's hired a detective to find us. If he does, she'll take Finn and Rose to Boston and I'll never see them again. That's why we keep moving. Can't serve papers if they can't find us. Jacob handed back the letter. Running ain't a life for children. Clara's eyes flashed. Losing them ain't a life for me. From inside the shack came a cough. Small, wet. The kind of cough that makes a mother's blood run cold. Clara's resolve broke. Please, she whispered. Please help her. I'll do anything. Just please don't let my baby die. Jacob stepped forward slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Here's what we're going to do. First we save Rose, then we figure out the rest. And ma'am, if that detective comes to my ranch asking questions, I ain't seen nobody, understood? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Why would you lie for strangers? Jacob looked at Finn standing beside his mother at the shack, barely holding together at this woman who'd lost everything but her children and was fighting to keep even that. Because 3 years ago, I prayed for God to take me instead of my son. He didn't listen, and I stopped believing he heard anything I said. But maybe he sent me a boy in boots too big, asking for water, so I'd remember what it feels like to have a purpose. Clara studied his face, searching for deception and finding only truth. Then she stepped aside. Rose is inside. She's bad. Jacob entered the shack. The girl on the bedroll was small even for 4 years old. Red gold hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Cheeks flushed dark with fever. Breathing in shallow, rapid pulls that Jacob could hear from the doorway. He'd seen this before. 3 years ago. In his own house. In his own son. But this time, he had water. This time he could help. Jacob knelt beside Rose and opened his pack. He soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it gently to her forehead. The girl's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Who's that man?" she whispered. Clara knelt on Rose's other side. "A friend, sweetheart." "We don't got friends." Jacob met Clara's eyes across Rose's small body and saw the truth of that statement in her face. "Well, now you do," Jacob said gently. "My name's Jacob. What's yours?" "Rose, like the flower." "That's a beautiful name. Your mama gave you a good one." "Mama says I'm her little flower in the dust." Jacob's throat tightened. "That's about the truest thing I ever heard." He worked methodically, the way Doc Garrett had shown him 3 years too late. Cold cloth on forehead, on neck, on wrists. Small sips of water every few minutes. Fever powder mixed in a cup cooled enough to drink. Clara watched everything he did with the intensity of someone memorizing a life-saving skill. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. "My wife, Sarah, got sick first. Fever hit her hard. I learned everything I could, tried everything Doc Garrett told me. It wasn't enough. Then Matthew, my boy, he got it too. I tried even harder with him, stayed up for 3 days straight, but nothing I did made any difference. They both died. Within 12 hours of each other. Clara's hand found Jacob's on the cloth, squeezed once. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Finn hovered near the door, arms crossed over his chest, watching like a sentry on duty. The boy hadn't sat down since they'd arrived, hadn't relaxed for even a moment. "Finn," Jacob said without looking up from Rose. "Come here, son." Finn approached warily. "You walked 4 hours today in boots that don't fit. You're exhausted. Sit down before you fall down." "I'm fine." "You're swaying on your feet. Sit." Finn's jaw set stubbornly, but his legs betrayed him. They buckled, and he sat down hard against the wall of the shack. Within 30 seconds, his eyes closed. Within a minute, he was asleep. Clara looked at her son, and her face did something that broke Jacob's heart. The fierce mother-warrior facade dissolved completely, and underneath was just a woman so tired and so scared and so desperately brave that it hurt to look at her. "He's 9 years old," she whispered, "and he thinks he's the man of this family, carries everything like it's his job to keep us alive. Won't let me see him cry, won't let Rose see him scared, sleeps with one eye open like a soldier, even though he should be playing and climbing trees and just being a child." Her voice cracked. "He walked 4 hours in his dead daddy's boots begging a stranger for water because I was too proud to ask for help. What kind of mother does that make me?" Jacob looked up from Rose. The kind who's doing the best she can with what she's got. That's the only kind of mother there is, Clara. The rest is just circumstances. The circumstances are going to kill my daughter. Not today, they ain't. They worked through the afternoon as the sun moved across the sky and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Jacob showed Clara things Doc Garrett had taught him. How to check breathing, how to monitor the fever's rise and fall, how to tell the difference between sleep that was healing and sleep that was slipping away. Hours passed. Rose's breathing stayed labored but steady. The fever held at dangerous but not critical. The water and medicine were doing their work, but it was slow. So slow. "Tell me about your husband," Jacob said at one point, mostly to keep Clara's mind occupied. Clara's hands stilled on the cloth she was wringing. "Jonathan was good. Best man I ever knew. Worked the railroad because it paid better than farming, even though I begged him not to. Railroad work is dangerous work. He said we needed the money, said he was building us a future. He loved you. He did, and I loved him. But love doesn't stop a freight car from crushing a man when the brakes fail. Love doesn't pay rent after he's gone. Love doesn't keep your children from going hungry." Her voice held bitterness and grief in equal measure. "I'm angry at him," she admitted. "I know I shouldn't be. He didn't mean to die. But I'm angry anyway. Angry he left us. Angry he chose that job. Angry he's not here to help me fight his mother who thinks I'm not good enough for his children. Anger's natural. Sarah used to get mad at God for little things. Burnt bread, rain on wash day. I'd laugh at her for it. Then she died, and I understood. Sometimes you got to be angry at something even if it don't make sense." Clara looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You stopped being angry at God?" "No, I stopped talking to him altogether. Figured if he wasn't listening anyway, wasn't no point in wasting breath. But you're here, helping strangers. That seems like something a man of faith would do." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I'm trying to earn my way back into his good graces, or maybe I'm just trying to save a little girl so I can tell myself I ain't completely useless." "You're not useless, Jacob Morrison. Tell that to my wife and son who died while I watched." The words came out harsher than he intended. Clara didn't flinch. "You couldn't save them. That don't make you useless. That makes you human." Before Jacob could respond, Rose stirred. Her eyes opened clearer than before. "Mama," Clara leaned over her daughter, tears streaming. "Right here, baby." "I'm not as hot anymore." Clara pressed her hand to Rose's forehead. The fever had dropped. Not broken, but dropped. Enough to mean the medicine was working. Enough to mean they had time. Clara's shoulders shook with silent sobs of relief. Finn woke with a start, immediately alert. "Rose?" "I'm okay, Finny, just thirsty." Finn scrambled over and took his sister's hand. "You scared me, Rosie." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just don't do it again." Rose smiled weakly. "I'll try." Jacob sat back on his heels and let the family have their moment. He'd done what he came to do. The crisis had passed. Rose would need monitoring through the night, but the worst danger had passed. He should go, leave them to rest, come back tomorrow with more water. But he didn't want to go. For the first time in 3 years, Jacob Morrison felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in colors, Sarah would have had words for Jacob made a decision. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. "Bring more water and food, whatever you need." Clara looked at him with something like wonder. "You'd do that?" "I would." "Why?" Jacob looked at Finn, exhausted, but still holding his sister's hand. At Rose, weak but alive. At Clara, crying with relief but trying to hide it. "Because," he said simply, "I've been dead for 3 years, walking and breathing, but dead inside. And today, a boy in boots too big knocked on my door and asked me for water, and for the first time since I lost my family, I felt alive again." He stood and gathered his empty canteens. "I'll be back before dawn with fresh water. Keep her cool through the night. If the fever spikes, send Finn. My ranch is due west. Can't miss it." "Mr. Morrison," Finn said, standing up on shaky legs. "Just Jacob, son. Finn reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a carved wooden horse, crude but careful, made by a child's hands. "My daddy taught me to carve before he died. This was going to be for Rose's birthday, but I want you to have it, as payment." Jacob took the tiny horse and felt its weight in his palm. Not much weight at all, but it felt heavier than gold. "This is the finest payment I ever received," he said, voice rough. "You mean it?" "I do. I'll keep it safe." Finn nodded once satisfied. Jacob walked out of the shack and into the cooling evening air. Behind him, he heard Clara's voice, soft and full of tears. "Thank you. Thank you for saving her." Jacob didn't turn around. If he did, he might not leave. And they needed rest more than they needed him hovering. He walked west toward his ranch, toward the empty house that waited. But for the first time in 3 years, it felt less like walking toward a tomb and more like walking toward something that might someday become a home again. In his pocket, the wooden horse Finn had carved pressed against his leg with every step. A boy had walked 2 hours asking for water. And in giving it, Jacob Morrison had found the one thing he thought was lost forever: purpose. The week that followed changed everything. Jacob Morrison, who had spoken to no one but his horse for 3 years, found himself riding east every morning before dawn. Found himself carrying water and food and firewood to a family living in a broken-down shack. Found himself sitting on the ground beside a 9-year-old boy, teaching him to set rabbit traps, while a 4-year-old girl named after a flower told them both stories about bugs she'd befriended. Found himself for the first time since Sarah and Matthew died, wanting to wake up in the morning. Rose's fever broke completely on the 2nd day. By the 3rd, she was running around the camp with the boundless energy of a child who'd been told to stay still too long. By the 4th, she'd named every rock tree and lizard within 100 yards of the shack and insisted on introducing them all to Jacob. "This is Gerald," she said, holding up a particularly unremarkable stone. "He's shy but very wise." "Pleased to meet you, Gerald," Jacob said with complete seriousness. Clara watched from the doorway of the shack, mending one of Finn's shirts with thread so worn it would probably break within the week. But she was smiling, actually smiling, and the sight of it did something strange to Jacob's chest. "You're encouraging her," Clara called out. "She's got imagination. That's worth encouraging." "She talks to rocks, Jacob." "I talk to my horse. Least rocks don't talk back and tell you you're doing things wrong," Rose giggled. The sound was like water over stones, bright and clear. Finn emerged from the scrub brush where Jacob had sent him to check the trap lines. He carried 2 rabbits, both caught clean. "Got 'em," Finn said, holding up his prizes with quiet pride. "Good work. You set those traps exactly right. Your daddy teach you any of this?" Finn's face clouded. "No, sir. Daddy died before he could teach me much about hunting. He was gonna, but then the railroad took him." Jacob stood and brushed dust from his pants. "Well, he'd be proud of you now. You're learning fast." Something shifted in Finn's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You really think so?" "I know so. Most boys your age can't set a trap worth a damn. You got it on the first try." "Don't curse in front of Rose," Finn said automatically, then looked embarrassed. "Sorry. Mama taught me to say that when grown folks forget." "Your mama's right. My apologies, Miss Rose." Rose, still holding Gerald the rock, nodded with grave acceptance of his apology. That evening, they cooked the rabbits over a fire Jacob had built from deadwood he'd hauled in on his last trip. Clara had a way with seasoning that made even tough meat taste like something worth eating. They sat in a circle around the fire as the sun went down, and for a while nobody spoke. They just ate and listened to the crackle of flames and the distant call of a nighthawk hunting. Then Rose, who never stayed quiet for long, looked at Jacob with those wide blue eyes. "Mr. Jake, do you know how to pray?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Jacob's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Clara's eyes snapped to her daughter, then to Jacob, worried. "I used to," Jacob said carefully. "Been a while." "How come—" "Rose," Clara said gently. "That's personal. But I want to know. Mama says we should pray before eating. She says it's polite to thank God for food, but Mr. Jake never prays. Does that mean he's not polite? Jacob set down his plate. The rabbit suddenly tasted like ash. I stopped praying a few years back, little one, got angry at God, stopped talking to him. Rose considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. Did he stop talking to you? The question hit harder than it should have. I don't know, Jacob admitted. Mama says God talks through people sometimes. She says when people help us, that's God talking. Maybe God sent Finney to your door so you'd know he's still listening, even if you're mad at him. The fire popped. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Jacob looked at this child who'd nearly died 3 days ago, who lived in a shack with nothing, who talked to rocks and believed in a God who sent messages through people. Maybe he did, Rose, Jacob said, voice rough. Maybe he did. Rose beamed at him. So will you pray now with us? Clara started to intervene. Rose, honey, Mr. Morrison doesn't have to. I'll pray, Jacob interrupted. Clara's eyes widened. Finn looked up from his plate, surprised. You will? Rose asked. I will, but I'm out of practice, so you'll have to help me. Rose clapped her hands together, delighted. She reached out and took Jacob's hand on one side, Clara's on the other. Finn completed the circle, his small hand gripping Jacob's calloused palm. Jacob looked down at the hands holding his. Small hands. Trusting hands. When was the last time someone had touched him with anything other than a handshake? When was the last time he'd felt connected to other human beings? 3 years. It had been 3 years. He cleared his throat, rough with emotion. Dear Lord, he began and had to stop. The words were harder than expected. It's been a while since we talked. I've been angry, still am if I'm honest, but I'm grateful too. Grateful. You sent me a boy who needed water. Grateful for this food, grateful for this family sitting here with me. I don't understand your ways. Don't know why you take some folks and leave others. But I'm trying to trust that maybe you know what you're doing, even when it don't make sense to me. He paused, squeezed the small hands holding his. Thank you for this food. Thank you for these people. And please keep them safe. They've had enough trouble. They deserve some peace. Amen. Amen, the others echoed. When Jacob looked up, Clara was crying, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, catching firelight. That was real good, Mr. Jake, Rose said. God liked that prayer. I could tell. How could you tell? Because my tummy felt warm when you said it. That's how you know God's listening. Your tummy gets warm. Jacob's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded. They finished eating in comfortable silence. After the meal, Finn helped Clara clean up, while Rose showed Jacob her collection of special rocks, each one with a name and a personality she'd invented. This one's Margaret. She's very proper and doesn't like getting dirty. And this is Samuel. He's brave, but sometimes scared of the dark. And this is, Rose, Clara called, time for bed, sweetheart. But I'm not sleepy. Yes, you are. Come on. Rose hugged the rock named Samuel, then ran to Jacob and hugged his leg. Thank you for praying with us. You're welcome, little flower. She ran inside. Finn lingered by the fire. I'll walk out with you, he said to Jacob. They walked a short distance from the shack, far enough that Clara and Rose wouldn't hear. Finn stopped and turned to face Jacob. In the moonlight, he looked older than 9, the kind of old that came from carrying weight too heavy for small shoulders. My daddy used to pray, Finn said quietly, every night. Even when things were hard, even when we didn't have enough money for rent, he'd pray and tell us God would provide. Your daddy sounds like he was a good man. He was. Best man I ever knew. But his prayers didn't save him from that freight car. And Mama's prayers didn't keep us from losing our house. And my prayers didn't keep Rose from getting sick. Finn's voice cracked. So what's the point? What's the point of praying if God don't listen anyway? Jacob knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. I don't have a good answer for you, son. I stopped praying for the same reason. Felt like talking to empty air. But then Rose asked me that question tonight about whether God stopped talking to me. And I realized maybe he didn't. Maybe I just stopped listening. That don't make sense. No, it don't. But here's what I know. Your daddy died, and that's terrible. You lost your house, and that's terrible too. Rose got sick, and I thought I might lose her the same way I lost my boy. But she didn't die. She's in there right now talking to rocks and being 4 years old. And you're out here keeping your family together at 9 years old. And your mama's fighting like a wildcat to keep you both. Maybe that's God talking, not through words, through people who don't give up." Finn was quiet for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "I'm trying to." Finn nodded slowly. "I miss my daddy." "I know you do. You miss your boy. Every day." "Does it get easier?" Jacob wanted to lie, wanted to tell this child that, yes, grief got easier, pain faded, life went back to normal. But he'd promised himself he'd never lie to this boy. "No," he said honestly. "It don't get easier. You just get stronger at carrying it. And some days you meet people who help you carry it, like you're helping me. I'm helping you. You are, you and Rose and your mama. You're helping me remember what it feels like to be alive." Finn stepped forward suddenly and wrapped his arms around Jacob's neck. The hug was fierce and brief over before Jacob could fully process it. "Thank you for saving Rose," Finn whispered. "I couldn't lose her too." "You won't, I promise." Finn pulled back, rubbed his eyes quickly. "I should go in. Mama worries if I stay out too late." "Go on then." Finn started toward the shack, then turned back. "Jacob, will you come back tomorrow? I'll be here before dawn with fresh water." "Good. Rose wants to show you the ant hill she found. She's named all the ants. There's like 100 of them." Jacob smiled despite himself. "Can't wait." He walked back to his ranch under a sky full of stars, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't count them to avoid thinking. He just looked up and remembered that Sarah used to love stargazing, used to make up stories about the constellations. Maybe that was okay. Maybe remembering didn't have to hurt quite so much anymore. The detective arrived on Thursday. Jacob was at the ranch fixing a section of fence that had rotted through when he heard the horse approaching. He looked up to see a man riding toward him on a rented livery animal, the kind of mediocre horse the stable in Redemption Valley kept for travelers who didn't know better. The man was maybe 40, dressed in a gray suit too heavy for the Montana summer, carrying a leather satchel and a notebook. He had the look of someone who asked questions for a living and didn't much care whether people wanted to answer them. Jacob set down his hammer and waited. The man reined in his horse and dismounted with the careful movements of someone who'd spent more time in carriages than saddles. "Morning," the man said. "You Jacob Morrison. Who's asking?" The man reached into his coat and produced a badge. "Private investigator licensed in Massachusetts." "Henry Walsh. I'm working for a Mrs. Iris Montgomery out of Boston. She's looking for her grandchildren. 2 kids, boy and a girl, traveling with their mother. Name's Parker. Clara Parker." Jacob kept his face neutral. "Don't know any Parkers. Maybe you know them by a different name. Woman's got red blonde hair, thin build. The boy's about 9, wearing clothes too big. Girl's 4, maybe 5. Lots of folks passing through Montana territory these days. Droughts pushing people out of homesteads all across the region." Walsh smiled the patient smile of a man who'd had this conversation many times. "Indeed, Mrs. Montgomery is quite worried about the children. She wants to provide them with a home education security. She believes their mother is unable to adequately care for them." "That's so. Mrs. Montgomery is prepared to offer a substantial reward for information leading to the children's recovery. $200. $200 was more money than most ranchers saw in a year, enough to buy new cattle, enough to drill a deeper well, enough to replace everything the drought had destroyed. Jacob looked Walsh in the eye. "That's a lot of money." "It is, especially for a rancher dealing with drought conditions." The implication hung in the air between them. Jacob picked up his hammer. "Tell you what, Mr. Walsh, if I see this woman and her children, I'll let you know. But right now, I got fence to mend and cattle to water. So, unless you got a warrant to search my property, I'd appreciate you moving along." Walsh's smile didn't falter. "No warrant, just a man doing his job. But Mr. Morrison, I should tell you I've been tracking this family for 6 months now. I'm very good at what I do. And I'm close, very close. The question isn't whether I'll find them. It's whether it happens peacefully or becomes difficult. Difficult for who? For everyone involved. Mrs. Montgomery is prepared to go to court if necessary. Montana Territorial Court favors stability for children. A woman living rough with no income versus a wealthy grandmother with resources. The outcome's fairly predictable. Jacob straightened up, hammer in hand. You ever think maybe the grandmother's wrong? Maybe those kids are better off with their mama, poor as she is, than with some rich lady in Boston who wants to separate them? That's not for me to decide. I just find people and tear families apart. Walsh's expression hardened slightly. I reunite children with family who can care for them. If you see Mrs. Parker, you'd be doing those children a favor by letting me know. They deserve better than whatever she can provide. Jacob stepped closer. They deserve their mother. Now get off my land. Walsh remounted his horse. I'll be staying at the boarding house in Redemption Valley if you change your mind. Think about those children, Mr. Morrison. Think about what's best for them. He rode away at an easy trot. Jacob waited until Walsh was out of sight, then immediately saddled Dusty and rode east at a gallop. Clara was hanging wash when Jacob thundered into camp. She dropped the shirt she'd been wringing and ran to meet him. What's wrong? We got a problem. Jacob explained about Walsh, about the questions, about the reward. Clara's face went white as bleached bone. He found us. Oh, God, he found us. He don't know exactly where you are yet, but he's close, too close. We have to run, tonight, before he— No. Clara stared at him. What? Running ain't working, Clara. You've been running for 8 months, and he tracked you down anyway. Time to stop running and start fighting. Fight with what? I got no money, no lawyer, no— You got me. And you got something else. What? Community. Clara shook her head. I don't have community. I got a shack in the woods and 2 children nobody knows about. That's going to change. Today. Jacob pulled her toward Dusty. Get Finn and Rose. We're going to town. You're going to meet some people. And when that detective files his papers, you're going to have witnesses who'll testify you're a good mother. Jacob, I can't just walk into town. What if someone recognizes me? What if they tell Walsh? Then they tell him, and he finds a whole town standing between him and you. Clara looked torn between hope and terror. What if this doesn't work? Then we try something else. But Clara, you can't keep hiding. Those kids need more than a shack and a mama who jumps at shadows. They need stability. And the only way you get that is by standing your ground. From inside the shack, Rose called out, Mama, is Mr. Jake here? I want to show him the Ant families. Clara closed her eyes. All right, she said quietly. All right, we'll go to town. But if this goes wrong, it won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll be standing right beside you when we find out. Redemption Valley's church sat at the north end of the main street, a simple white building with a bell tower and worn wooden pews inside. Reverend Thomas Crane had been preaching there for 15 years, and in that time he'd buried Jacob's wife and son, married half the town, and baptized what felt like every baby born within 50 miles. He was in his office when Jacob knocked, going over Sunday's sermon with reading glasses perched on his nose. Jacob Morrison, Reverend Crane said, looking up. Haven't seen you darken this church's doorway in 3 years. I know, Reverend. I've been absent. Absent from God or absent from people? Both. Crane gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what brings you here now. Jacob sat. He explained about Finn and Clara and Rose, about the grandmother in Boston, about Walsh the detective, about the court papers threatening to tear a family apart. Crane listened without interrupting, fingers steepled under his chin. When Jacob finished, the Reverend was quiet for a long moment. You've been caring for this family? Yes, sir. For how long? A week now. Since the boy came asking for water. And you want what the church's protection? I want witnesses. People who'll testify Clara's a good mother if it comes to court. People who'll stand up and say poverty ain't the same as neglect. Crane removed his glasses and polished them on his shirt. Jacob, I haven't seen you show interest in another human being since Sarah and Matthew passed. You've been a ghost in this town. And now you're asking me to rally the congregation for a woman you've known 1 week. Yes, sir? Why, Jacob met the Reverend's eyes. Because that boy walked 2 hours to save his sister. Because that little girl talks to rocks and believes in a God who listens. Because their mama's been living in a broken shack for 8 months to keep her children together. And because for the first time in 3 years, I've got a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Those kids, that family, they gave me that. And I'll be damned if I let some rich grandmother in Boston take them away because she's got money and lawyers. Crane studied him for a long moment. You're in love with her, the mother. Jacob opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it. Was he in love with Clara? He barely knew her. 1 week wasn't enough time to fall in love, but he thought about the way she fought for her children, the way she smiled when Rose made her laugh, the way she'd looked at him across the fire last night when he'd prayed for the first time in 3 years. I don't know what I am, Jacob said honestly, but I know I care about them, all 3 of them, and I know they need help. Crane put his glasses back on. This grandmother, she's filed legal papers. According to the letter Clara showed me, yes, Montana Territorial Court. Then she'll need a lawyer. Do they have one? No, sir. They got nothing but the clothes they're wearing and a mama who loves them. Crane stood up and walked to his desk. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. My younger brother David, he's a lawyer in Helena, does pro bono work for families who can't afford representation. I'll wire him today. If he takes the case, he'll need time to prepare. When's the hearing? I don't know. Papers haven't been served yet. Then we've got time. But Jacob, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Clara and those children need to be visible. Can't defend a woman who's hiding in the woods. She needs to be part of this community. That's why I'm here. Thought maybe Sunday service would be a good place to start. Crane smiled. Bring them Sunday. I'll make sure they're welcomed properly. Saturday night, Clara washed all 3 of them in cold creek water hauled from Jacob's well. She scrubbed Finn until his ears were pink-combed Rose's hair until it shone, and put on her one good dress, the one she'd been saving for an occasion that never came. Jacob had brought clothes for Finn used but clean from a family in town whose boys had outgrown them. They fit better than the too large shirt and pants he'd been wearing, though the boots were still his father's, still too big. I can't do this, Clara said for the 10th time. They were at Jacob's ranch. He'd insisted they spend the night there instead of the shack, said it wasn't proper for them to walk into church looking like they'd been sleeping rough, even if they had been. Clara sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking. What if they judge me? What if they look at my children and see poverty instead of love? What if they side with Iris? Jacob poured her coffee, set it in front of her. Then they ain't worth knowing anyway. But we need them. You said we need witnesses. We do. But most people in Redemption Valley are decent folks. They'll see a good mother when they look at you. Trust me. I don't know how to trust anymore. Jacob sat across from her. Then trust me to trust for you. Just for tomorrow. You can go back to not trusting after that if you want. Clara laughed despite herself. A small sound, but real. You're a strange man, Jacob Morrison. I know. Why are you doing this? Really? He'd asked himself the same question 100 times this week. Because I've been alone for 3 years, he said slowly, and loneliness is a kind of dying. You die a little bit every day until there's nothing left but routine. Then your boy showed up at my door and I remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. Your family gave me that back. So now I'm giving you what I can, which is this house, this town, and whatever fight I got left in me. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you. Her hand was small in his, calloused from work, trembling slightly. Jacob squeezed gently. You're going to be fine tomorrow, all 3 of you. From the guest bedroom came Rose's voice. Mama Finney won't let me bring Gerald to church. Gerald's a rock, Rosie, Finn's exasperated voice replied. You can't bring rocks to church. Why not? God made rocks. Reverend will want to meet him. Clara pulled her hand back, smiling through tears. I should go referee before they wake the whole county. She stood paused. "Jacob, that prayer you said the other night, at the fire. Did you mean it? Which part? The part about trying to trust God even when it don't make sense." "I meant it." "Good. Because I'm going to need God on our side tomorrow. And I figure he listens to people who've been angry at him. Means they care enough to be mad." She left before he could respond. Jacob sat alone in his kitchen in the house that had been a tomb for 3 years and felt the walls breathing again. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot. By the time they walked to church, dust coated everything and sweat soaked through shirts. But Clara held her head high. Finn walked beside her, protective, as always. And Rose skipped ahead, humming a song she'd made up about flowers and sunshine. The church doors stood open. Inside, voices sang a hymn. Jacob remembered from childhood. Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can. They're going to stare. Let them." Jacob offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. They walked up the steps together. Finn took Rose's hand, and together the 4 of them entered the church. Every head turned. The singing faltered, then stopped. 50 pairs of eyes fixed on the strangers in their midst. Clara's grip on Jacob's arm tightened until her nails dug into his skin. Rose hid behind her mother's skirt. Finn's hand went to his pocket where he kept his father's knife. Whispers started. Jacob heard fragments. "Who are they? Where'd they come from? Look at that woman's dress, worn clean through." Then Reverend Crane's voice rang out from the pulpit, warm and welcoming as summer rain. "Brothers and sisters, we have guests this morning, Mrs. Clara Parker and her children Finn and Rose. They're new to our community, and I expect you all to make them feel welcome as Christ would want." Silence. Then from the 3rd pew, Martha Jenkins stood up. She was 60 if she was a day, a seamstress who'd lost her daughter to childbirth 5 years back and hadn't smiled much since. She started clapping, slow at first, then faster. One person joined her, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire congregation was applauding. Clara's knees buckled slightly. Jacob held her up. "Told you," he whispered. They found seats in the back. The service continued, but Jacob barely heard a word of it. He was too busy watching Clara's face as she realized, maybe for the first time in 8 months, that she wasn't alone anymore. After the service, people swarmed them. Martha Jenkins pushed through the crowd first. "Mrs. Parker, I'm Martha. I run the seamstress shop on Main Street. I've got fabric needles, thread, anything you need. You come by tomorrow, and we'll make those children proper clothes. No charge." Clara's eyes filled. "I can't accept." "You can, and you will. I got no grandchildren of my own. Let me do this." Next came Doc Samuel Garrett, his medical bag still in hand from making rounds that morning. "Ma'am, I examined that little girl of yours when Jacob brought her by yesterday. She's healthy now, but if you need anything medical, you come to me. I don't turn away folks who can't pay." Then Alice Brennan, the schoolteacher, young and earnest. "Finn, is it?" "You've been schooled." Finn nodded shyly. "Mama teaches me reading and writing." "Good. You'll have a spot in my classroom starting Monday if you want it. I've got primers, slates, everything you need." Sheriff Daniel Cooper stepped forward last. A big man with kind eyes and a badge that gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Mrs. Parker, if anyone gives you trouble, you come to me. I don't care if they got money or lawyers or anything else. My job's to protect folks in this territory. You're one of them now." Clara couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming. Then Rose tugged on Sheriff Cooper's sleeve. "Mr. Sheriff, do you like ants?" The sheriff blinked. "I reckon I never gave them much thought." "You should. They're very organized. I got a whole family of them living near our house. I named them all. The queen's name is Beatrice." The sheriff's stern face cracked into a smile. "That's a fine name for a queen ant." "I know. I'm very good at names." The crowd laughed. Real laughter, warm and accepting. Jacob felt his throat tighten. This was community. This was what happened when people chose to help instead of judge. Then the church doors opened again, and Henry Walsh walked in. The laughter died. Walsh stood in the doorway, surveying the scene with professional detachment. His eyes found Clara recognition lighting his face. "Mrs. Clara Parker," he said, pulling papers from his coat. "I'm serving you with a petition from Mrs. Iris Montgomery regarding custody of your minor children Finn and Rose Parker. You have 30 days to respond in Montana Territorial Court." The church erupted. Martha Jenkins stepped between Walsh and Clara. "You can't just walk into a church and, 'It's legal, ma'am. I've got the right to serve papers anywhere I find the subject." Sheriff Cooper moved forward. "Walsh, this is Sunday service. Show some respect." "I'm showing plenty of respect, Sheriff, just doing my job." Clara took the papers with shaking hands. Jacob put his arm around her shoulders. Walsh looked around at the crowd of hostile faces. "Mrs. Parker, for what it's worth, Mrs. Montgomery genuinely believes she's acting in your children's best interest. She wants to give them opportunities you can't provide." Clara found her voice. "My children have love. That's the only opportunity that matters. Love doesn't pay for doctors or schooling or food." "No," Reverend Crane said, stepping down from the pulpit. "But community does, and Mrs. Parker has community now." Walsh looked at the Reverend, at the crowd, at the 50 witnesses who would testify to Clara's character. He'd made a mistake serving the papers here. Jacob could see the realization dawning on the detective's face. "The hearing's in 30 days, Walsh said. "Redemption Valley Courthouse. Mrs. Montgomery will be bringing counsel from Boston." "Then we'll be bringing ours," Crane replied. Walsh nodded once and left. The moment the door closed behind him, Clara's legs gave out. Jacob caught her before she hit the floor. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you." She clung to him, sobbing into his shirt, while Finn held Rose, and the entire congregation surrounded them like a wall of protection. That afternoon, Reverend Crane convened a meeting in his office. Jacob, Clara, Sheriff Cooper, Martha Jenkins, and Doc Garrett crowded into the small space. "We've got 30 days, Crane said. "My brother David will take the case pro bono. He'll need affidavits from everyone willing to testify. Sheriff, can you handle that?" Cooper nodded. "I'll start making rounds tomorrow." "Good. Martha, can you provide employment for Clara?" "Something official we can show the court. She can work in my shop. I need help with the fall orders anyway." "Doc, I'll testify to the children's health. No signs of neglect or abuse." Crane looked at Jacob. "What about you? What's your role in all this?" Jacob glanced at Clara. She was pale but composed, holding herself together through sheer force of will. "I'll do whatever needs doing," Jacob said. "The court's going to ask about your relationship with Mrs. Parker. You need to have an answer." "We're friends. Just friends." Jacob hesitated. Clara's eyes met his across the room. "I don't rightly know what we are," Jacob admitted, "but I know I care about this family, and I know I'll fight to keep them together." Crane nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Now the grandmother's going to paint Clara as unfit. Homeless, no income, living rough. We need to counter that narrative. Starting today, you're not homeless anymore, Clara. You're a resident of Redemption Valley with employment, community support, and stable housing." "Where am I supposed to live? I can't afford," Martha interrupted. "You'll stay with me. I got extra rooms above my shop. You and the children. I can't impose." "It ain't imposing. It's surviving. And we're going to make sure you do." Clara broke down again. This time Martha held her while she cried. That night, after Clara and the children had settled into Martha's spare rooms, after the town had finished rallying around a family they'd just met, Jacob rode back to his ranch alone. The house felt empty again, but different. Not tomb empty, just quiet. He walked through the room Sarah had loved past Matthew's door into his own bedroom. He pulled out the carved wooden horse Finn had given him and set it on the dresser. Then he knelt beside his bed and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He prayed. Not out loud, just in his head, talking to a God he'd been ignoring. "Lord, I don't know if you're listening. Don't know if you ever were. But if you are, I'm asking for help. Not for me, for Clara and Finn and Rose. They're good people who've had bad luck. They deserve better than what they've got. That grandmother in Boston, she's got money and power and lawyers. We've got community and love and not much else. But maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what you were trying to tell me when you sent Finn to my door, that we're stronger together than apart. So if you're listening, if you still care about prayers from angry men who've finally stopped being angry, please help us win this fight. Help us keep that family together. They've already lost a husband and father. Don't make them lose each other too. He stayed on his knees for a long time, not praying anymore, just being still. When he finally stood, his knees creaked and his back ached. But something in his chest felt lighter. He walked to the window and looked out at the land he'd worked for 20 years. Land that had felt meaningless after Sarah and Matthew died. Now it felt like home again, not because anything had changed about the ranch, but because for the first time in 3 years, Jacob Morrison had people to come home to. He thought about Clara's smile when the church had applauded, about Finn's quiet pride when he'd caught those rabbits, about Rose introducing a sheriff to her aunt family, and he thought about tomorrow when he'd ride into town and help Clara settle into her new life, a life that maybe, if they were very lucky, might include him. The wooden horse caught moonlight on the dresser. A boy had walked 2 hours asking for water. And in 30 days, Jacob would stand in a courtroom and fight to make sure that boy got to keep his family. Whatever it took. 27 days. That's how long it took for everything to change. Clara Parker traded a broken-down shack for a bright room above Martha Jenkins's seamstress shop, where morning light poured through real windows. Her hands, once scraping by on trapped rabbits, now flew through fabric with the skill of someone who'd been sewing since childhood, earning honest wages that felt like freedom. Finn Parker sat in Alice Brennan's classroom reading 2 years ahead of his age. He'd made real friends now, boys who invited him fishing and didn't care that his boots had belonged to his father or that his mother was poor. Rose Parker had moved from talking to rocks in isolation to charming every person in Redemption Valley. Hardened ranchers and stern shopkeepers softened under her endless questions and her conviction that bugs deserved names and feelings. Jacob Morrison, who'd spoken to no one for 3 years now, walked Main Street every evening. The whole town knew where he was headed. To Martha's shop, where a certain red blonde woman waited on the porch with coffee and a smile that made his chest ache in ways he'd forgotten were possible. But now the 27 days were over. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tonight, Jacob sat on his porch watching the sun set over land that finally felt like home again. The drought had broken 2 weeks back. Rain had come in sheets, filling the creek, greening the grass, saving what was left of the cattle. Some folks said it was coincidence. Others said it was God answering prayers. Jacob didn't much care which it was. He was just grateful. Dusty whinnied from the corral, and Jacob looked up to see a rider approaching. Not Clara. She'd be at Martha's helping get the children ready for bed, trying not to think about tomorrow. This rider was older. A woman in a black traveling dress, sitting a hired horse with the stiff posture of someone unused to riding. Jacob stood as she drew closer. She was 60, maybe 65. Silver hair pinned in a severe bun. Blue eyes that held winter. Expensive clothes, city clothes, the kind that didn't belong in Montana territory. She stopped at the fence and looked at Jacob with an expression that was part grief, part determination, part desperate hope. "Mr. Morrison, that's me. I'm Iris Montgomery." The name hit like a fist. Jacob's hand tightened on the porch rail. "You're early. Hearing's not till tomorrow." "I know. I arrived this afternoon. I wanted to see you before the proceedings. I was told you've been helping my grandchildren." "I've been helping a family that needed it." Iris dismounted with difficulty. She was not a woman accustomed to physical labor or rough travel. Everything about her spoke of money and refinement and a life lived far from dust and drought. "May I speak with you just for a moment?" Every instinct told Jacob to refuse, to send her away, to protect Clara and the children from this woman who wanted to tear them apart. But something in Iris's face stopped him. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a woman carrying grief so heavy it had bent her spine. "5 minutes," he said. Iris tied her horse and walked to the porch. Jacob didn't invite her to sit. They stood facing each other like duelists preparing for battle. "I want to see them," Iris said. "My grandchildren, before the hearing. Is that possible?" "That's up to their mother, not me." "But you have influence with Clara. Everyone in town says so. What everyone says and what's true ain't always the same thing." Iris's composure cracked slightly. "Please. I've traveled 2,000 miles. I've spent 6 months searching. I just want to see the children of my only son before we stand in a courtroom and fight over them." "You started this fight, not Clara." "I know." Iris's voice broke. "I know what you think of me, that I'm a heartless woman trying to steal children from their mother. But, Mr. Morrison, have you lost a child?" The question landed like a knife between ribs. "Yes," Jacob said quietly, "I have." "Then you understand. You understand what it does to you, how it hollows you out until there's nothing left but the need to hold on to something, anything that keeps them alive in your memory." She pulled a photograph from her bag with shaking hands, held it out. Jacob took it. A young man, maybe 25, with Finn's serious eyes and Rose's bright smile. He stood beside a woman who was clearly Clara younger, happier, both of them beaming at the camera. "That's my son, Jonathan, my only child. I was 40 when I had him. My husband died when Jonathan was 10. It was just the two of us for 15 years. I gave him everything, the best schools, the best opportunities. I wanted him to have the life I'd never had." Iris's hands twisted together. "Then he met Clara at a church social. A farmer's daughter with no education, no prospects, no future. He fell in love with her anyway. I told him he was throwing his life away. I told him he could do better. I told him marrying beneath himself would ruin everything I'd worked to give him." She stopped, swallowed hard. "He married her anyway, moved out here to Montana Territory to work for the railroad because it paid better than the positions I'd arranged for him in Boston. And then 2 years later, a freight car crushed him because the railroad company cut corners on safety equipment." Tears tracked down her face, cutting lines through powder and pride. "I blamed Clara. If she hadn't married him, he'd still be in Boston, safe, alive, working a respectable job, coming home to me every Sunday for dinner. So when he died, I convinced myself Clara had killed him, that her poverty, her need had driven him to dangerous work. And I decided the only way to save anything of my son was to take his children and raise them the way I'd raised him." Jacob handed back the photograph. "But they ain't yours to raise. They're hers." "I know that now, or I'm starting to. When I saw Clara this afternoon in town, walking with the children, both of them clean and happy and laughing, when I saw the way Finn held his sister's hand and the way Clara looked at them with such fierce love, I realized something." "What?" "That I've been trying to replace my son instead of honoring his memory. Jonathan chose Clara. He chose this life. He chose love over money. And in taking his children from the woman he loved, I'm not saving them. I'm destroying the last thing he left behind." Iris looked at Jacob with eyes that held 3 years of grief that mirrored his own. "But I can't stop, can't pull back. The papers are filed. The lawyers are hired. The hearing is tomorrow. And even knowing I'm wrong, I can't seem to let go of the only piece of Jonathan I have left." Jacob understood. God help him, he understood completely. "You want me to tell you it's okay," he said. "Want me to say you're doing the right thing. I can't do that." "I know. I just wanted someone to understand why I can't stop even though I should." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Morrison, do you love her, Clara?" The question caught him off guard. Did he love Clara? He thought about the way his heart jumped when he saw her walking down the street, the way her laugh made him smile even when he was alone, the way she'd looked at him 2 nights ago when he'd brought flowers he'd picked himself because he didn't know how else to show what he felt. "I think I might," he admitted. "Then fight for her tomorrow. Fight harder than I do, because if you win, at least I'll know the children are with people who love them. That's more than I can give." Iris mounted her horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Jacob stood on his porch long after she disappeared, holding the porch rail and thinking about grief and love, and how sometimes the two got so tangled You couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The night before the hearing, Jacob found Finn sitting alone behind Martha's shop, throwing rocks at a fence post. The boy's aim was good. Every rock hit its target with a sharp crack that echoed in the still air. Jacob sat down beside him without speaking. They sat in silence for a while. Then Finn threw another rock harder this time. I'm scared. I know. What if we lose tomorrow? What if the judge says we have to go to Boston? Then we'll appeal, fight it in a higher court. And if that don't work, Jacob had no answer for that, no comfortable lie to offer. I won't let them take you without a fight, son. I promise you that. Finn threw another rock. This one missed. He picked up another. Grandma Iris came by today. Mama didn't know I saw, but I did. She was standing outside the shop just looking up at our windows. She looks sad. She is sad. Doesn't make what she's doing right, but she's sad. Do you think she really wants us? Or does she just want something of our daddy back? The question showed wisdom beyond 9 years. Bit of both, I reckon. People are complicated that way. Finn was quiet for a long moment. If we have to go to Boston, will you come visit us? Jacob's throat closed. Finn, promise me. If we lose tomorrow, promise you won't forget about us. Promise you'll write letters. Promise you'll come to see us, even if it's just once a year. Promise we won't lose you too. Jacob pulled the boy into a hug, fierce and tight. You're not going to lose me. You're not going to lose your mama. We're going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow, and we're going to win. You hear me? But what if? No, what ifs. We're going to win, because that judge is going to see what I see. A boy who's brave and smart and loves his family. A little girl who makes friends with ants and believes rocks have feelings. And a mama who'd walk through fire to keep you safe. No amount of money can compete with that. Finn pulled back, rubbed his eyes. I hope you're right. I am right. Jacob wished he felt as certain as he sounded. Morning came too fast. The courtroom in Redemption Valley was a simple affair. Wood benches, a judge's platform, windows that let in too much light and made everything feel exposed. By 8 in the morning it was already packed. Half the town had shown up. Martha Jenkins sat in the front row, her sewing scissors prominently displayed in her lap like a weapon. Doc Garrett had closed his practice for the day. Sheriff Cooper stood against the back wall, arms crossed, radiating protective authority. Alice Brennan sat with a group of mothers whose children attended her school. Reverend Crane sat with his brother David, the lawyer, who'd traveled from Helena to take Clara's case. And in the very back, trying to be invisible, Walsh the detective sat with his notebook, watching everything with professional detachment. Jacob sat beside Clara on the defendant's side. She wore a dress Martha had made for her, simple but well-cut, clean, and respectable. Her hands shook in her lap. Jacob covered them with one of his own. Breathe, he whispered. I can't. Yes, you can. In and out. Like we practiced. Clara breathed. In, out, in, out. Across the aisle, Iris Montgomery sat with her attorney, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit that made everyone else in the courtroom look like farmers, which Jacob supposed most of them were. The attorney's name was Charles Whitfield, and he had the look of someone who won cases for a living and felt no particular emotion about it either way. Finn and Rose were not in the courtroom. Martha's sister was watching them at the boarding house. They'd said goodbye that morning with hugs and tears, and Rose insisting that Jacob carry Gerald the rock for good luck. Jacob had the rock in his pocket now. It pressed against his leg, solid and ridiculous and somehow comforting. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Margaret Thornton presiding. Everyone stood. The judge entered. She was 55, iron-gray hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been riding circuit in Montana Territory for 10 years and had a reputation for being fair, thorough, and utterly unimpressed by money or status. Jacob had met her once years ago when she'd presided over a property dispute. She'd ruled against the richer party because the law supported the poorer one, and she'd told the rich rancher to his face that justice didn't care about the size of his bank account. He hoped that was still true. Judge Thornton settled into her chair and opened the file in front of her. Case number 447, Montgomery versus Parker. Petition for custody of minor children, Finn Parker, age 9, and Rose Parker, age 4. Mrs. Montgomery is represented by counsel. Mrs. Parker as well. Good. Let's proceed. She looked up at both tables. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This court's only interest is the welfare of the children. I don't care about money. I don't care about social status. I don't care about personal grievances between adults. I care about two children who deserve stability, safety, and love. Counselors, make your arguments with that in mind. Whitfield stood first. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Mrs. Iris Montgomery seeks custody of her deceased son's children because their mother cannot provide basic necessities. Mrs. Parker has been homeless for 8 months, living in abandoned structures with no running water, no reliable food source, and no income. While I don't question her love for the children, love alone does not constitute adequate care. He placed photographs on the judge's bench, pictures of the shack where Clara and the children had been living, images of the patched canvas walls, the dirt floor, the empty fire pit. These are the conditions Mrs. Parker provided for her children before this community intervened. A 4-year-old girl nearly died of fever because her mother had no access to clean water or medical care. A 9-year-old boy was walking miles in ill-fitting boots hunting for food because his mother couldn't feed him. This is not adequate provision. This is survival at its most desperate. Whitfield gestured to Iris. Mrs. Montgomery, by contrast, can provide a home in Boston with running water, electricity, proper schooling, medical care, and every opportunity these children deserve. She is their grandmother. She loved their father. She wants what's best for them. The choice before this court should be obvious. He sat down. David Crane stood. He was younger than Whitfield, less polished, but his voice carried conviction that no amount of expensive suits could buy. Your Honor, Mr. Whitfield is correct about one thing. This case should be obvious. A mother fought to keep her children together under impossible circumstances. When her husband died, she lost her home. When she couldn't pay rent, she was evicted. When her mother-in-law tried to take her children, she ran rather than lose them. And yes, she lived in desperate conditions. But she never abandoned those children, never stopped fighting for them, never gave up even when giving up would have been easier. David walked to the judge's bench and placed his own documents there. These are affidavits from 15 residents of Redemption Valley, statements attesting to Clara Parker's character, her work ethic, and her devotion to her children. These are pay stubs from Martha Jenkins showing that Mrs. Parker has been gainfully employed for 3 weeks. This is a letter from Sheriff Cooper confirming that Mrs. Parker has broken no laws and is a law-abiding citizen. This is testimony from Dr. Garrett confirming that both children are healthy, well-adjusted, and show no signs of neglect. He turned to face Iris. Mrs. Montgomery believes money equals care, but she's wrong. These children don't need a mansion in Boston. They need their mother, and they need a community that's proven it will support them. That's what we're offering, not wealth, not status, but something infinitely more valuable, home. David sat down. Judge Thornton studied the documents in front of her. I'll hear testimony. Mrs. Montgomery, you may take the stand. Iris walked to the witness chair with the careful dignity of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Whitfield questioned her first. Mrs. Montgomery, tell the court about your son. Iris's voice shook when she answered. Jonathan was my only child, my whole world. I raised him alone after my husband died, gave him everything I could, the best education, the best opportunities. He was brilliant, graduated top of his class, had job offers from prestigious firms in Boston. And what happened? He met Clara at a church social, fell in love. I tried to warn him that marrying someone with no prospects would limit his future, but he wouldn't listen. He married her and moved to Montana Territory to work for the railroad. How did he die? Iris's composure cracked. A freight car crushed him when the brakes failed. The railroad company had cut corners on safety equipment. My son died because he was trying to earn enough money to support a family. Whitfield let the words hang in the air. And after his death, what did you do? I offered to help Clara and the children, offered money, a home, everything they needed. She refused. Then she disappeared with my grandchildren. I've spent 6 months searching for them because I couldn't bear the thought of them living in poverty when I could give them so much more. Do you love your grandchildren? I've never met them, but they're all I have left of Jonathan. Of course I love them. David Crane stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Montgomery, when you offered to help Clara, did you offer to help her as well as the children? Iris hesitated. I offered to take the children. That wasn't the question. Did you offer to help Clara remain with her children? I offered her money. Money to keep the children or money to give them up? Iris's jaw tightened. I believed the children would be better off with me. So you tried to buy them from their mother. I tried to save them from poverty by separating them from the only parent they have left. Whitfield objected. Judge Thornton overruled. David pressed on. Mrs. Montgomery, have you ever raised children while poor? Have you ever had to choose between medicine and food? Have you ever had to explain to a child why you can't afford shoes that fit? No, but then you don't know what Clara Parker has endured. You don't know what it costs to keep a family together when the world is trying to tear it apart. You only know that you have money, and she doesn't. And you believe that makes you the better guardian. I can give them opportunities she can't. Can you give them their mother? Can you give them the community that's rallied around them? Can you give them love without conditions? Iris didn't answer. David returned to his seat. Judge Thornton called Clara to the stand. Clara walked forward on shaking legs. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and Jacob could see the effort it took for her to keep her voice steady. David questioned her gently. Mrs. Parker, tell the court about the day your husband died. Clara's eyes filled, but her voice held. Jonathan left for work like any other day, kissed me goodbye, told the children he'd bring them candy when he came home. He never came home. They found him under a freight car that afternoon. The brakes had failed. He was trying to stop it from rolling into other workers. He saved 3 men, but the car crushed him. What happened after? I fell apart. For weeks I couldn't function. Finn took care of Rose while I just existed. Then the eviction notice came. We had 1 week to vacate. I tried to find work, but nobody wanted to hire a widow with 2 children. That's when the letters from Iris started coming. What did they say? That she wanted to help, that she could give the children a better life, that I should let her take them to Boston for their own good. But then I got a letter from a lawyer saying she was filing custody papers. That's when I realized she didn't want to help me. She wanted to replace me. Clara's hands gripped the armrests. So I packed what we could carry and we left. We moved from place to place. I found work where I could. Sewing, washing, anything. Finn trapped rabbits. We survived. It wasn't pretty, but we survived together. Why didn't you accept Mrs. Montgomery's offer? Because my children are not for sale. I don't care how much money she has. They're mine. Jonathan gave them to me. And I'll die before I let anyone take them. The courtroom was silent. Whitfield stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Parker, your daughter nearly died of fever because you had no access to clean water, correct? Yes. And you had no money for a doctor? Yes. And you were living in an abandoned building that was falling apart? Yes. And yet you call this adequate care? Clara's eyes flashed. I call it doing the best I could with what I had. Rose got sick, but she didn't die. Because my son walked miles to find help. Because a good man gave us water. Because we fought to save her. That's what families do. We fight. But you shouldn't have to fight Mrs. Parker. That's the point. Mrs. Montgomery can give your children a life where they don't have to fight for basic necessities. She can give them things. I give them love. Love doesn't pay for doctors. No, Clara said, voice breaking. But it's what kept me checking Rose's breathing every 10 minutes for 3 days straight. It's what made Finn walk until his feet bled to save his sister. It's what makes us a family. Your client wants to give my children a comfortable cage. I'm giving them a life where they know they're loved more than anything in this world." She looked directly at Iris. "I lost my husband, I lost my home, I lost everything but my children, and I'll fight you and every lawyer in Boston before I lose them too." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Thornton banged her gavel. "Order! We will have order." When the room quieted, she looked at both attorneys. "Any other witnesses?" David stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Jacob Morrison." Jacob's heart jumped. They hadn't discussed this. He walked to the stand, was sworn in, sat down, feeling like every eye in the room was judging him. David approached. "Mr. Morrison, how do you know the Parker family? Finn came to my door 3 weeks ago asking for water. His sister was sick. I helped. And since then, I've been bringing them supplies, water, food, firewood, whatever they needed. Why?" Jacob looked at Clara. "Because I lost my wife and son 3 years ago, and for 3 years I was dead inside, just going through motions. Then a 9-year-old in oversized boots knocked on my door asking for water, and I remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. This family gave me a reason to keep living, so I'm trying to give them a reason to keep fighting." David nodded. "Mr. Morrison, what is your relationship with Mrs. Parker?" Before Jacob could answer, something in him shifted. He'd been planning to say they were friends, to keep it simple, professional. But sitting in this courtroom watching Clara fight for her children, seeing Iris's grief wrapped in money and lawyers, Jacob realized something. He loved Clara Parker, loved her courage, loved her fierce protection of her children, loved the way she smiled when Rose said something ridiculous, loved the strength it took to keep going when everything had fallen apart. And those children deserved to know someone was willing to fight for all of them, not just for 3 weeks, forever. Jacob stood up in the witness box. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement." Judge Thornton raised an eyebrow. "This is irregular, Mr. Morrison." "I know, ma'am, but it's important." She gestured for him to continue. Jacob turned to face Clara. She stared at him, confused. "Clara Parker, I know this ain't the time or place, and I know we've only known each other 3 weeks. But these past weeks, you and your children have given me something I thought died with my wife and son. You've given me hope, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning that ain't just obligation." He stepped down from the witness box and walked toward her. The courtroom held its collective breath. "I loved my wife, I loved my son, and losing them nearly killed me. I spent 3 years being alone because I couldn't bear the thought of loving someone again and losing them. But then a desperate boy came asking for help to save his sister, and Rose named a Rock Gerald, and you looked at me like I was worth something, even when I didn't believe it myself." Jacob knelt in front of Clara's chair. The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. "I'm asking you in front of God and this court and everybody, will you marry me? Not because of this hearing, not to save your children, but because I love you, and I love Finn and Rose, and I want to be the family we've already started to become." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "Jacob, you don't have to do this for us. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, because I've been half alive for 3 years, and you made me whole again. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Clara looked at him with red eyes and a face full of hope and fear. Then she said the word that changed everything. "Yes." The courtroom exploded. Judge Thornton banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order in this court." Across the aisle, Iris Montgomery stood abruptly. Her face had gone white. "This is a manipulation," she said, voice shaking. "He's only proposing to circumvent my petition. This is a fraud." Jacob stood still, holding Clara's hand. "No, ma'am. This is a man who found a family when he wasn't looking for one, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take them away." Whitfield was on his feet. "Your Honor, this changes the legal landscape significantly. If Mrs. Parker marries Mr. Morrison, the children will have 2 parents and a stable home. I need time to consult with my client." 30-minute recess, Judge Thornton declared. "We reconvene at 11. Outside the courthouse, Clara grabbed Jacob's arm. "What did you just do?" "I proposed. In front of the whole town. Seemed like the right time. "Jacob, you don't have to marry me to save my children." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not marrying you to save your children. I'm marrying you because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is seeing you. Because when Rose talks to rocks, it makes me smile. Because when Finn calls me by my name instead of sir, my heart does something strange. Because for 3 years I've been a ghost and you made me human again." Clara's laugh was half sob. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." "Then say yes again. Say yes because you want to, not because you have to." She kissed him, right there on the courthouse steps with half the town watching. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Morrison." Inside the courthouse, Iris Montgomery sat in an empty jury room with her lawyer and her grief. "We need to fight this," Whitfield said. "A hasty proposal doesn't negate months of inadequate care." But Iris wasn't listening. She was thinking about the way Clara had looked at Jacob, the way he'd knelt in front of her with his whole heart visible on his face, the way the entire courtroom had erupted in joy. Jonathan had looked at Clara that way once, with absolute devotion, with love so pure it transcended logic, and Iris had told him he was throwing his life away. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need a moment alone. Ma'am, we need to discuss strategy. Please, just give me a moment." Whitfield left reluctantly. Iris sat in the silence and looked at the photograph she'd shown Jacob, Jonathan smiling beside Clara, both of them so young, so happy, so in love. She'd spent 3 years blaming Clara for Jonathan's death. 3 years believing that if he'd never met her, never married her, he'd still be alive. But would he have been happy Jonathan had chosen Clara, had chosen this hard life in Montana Territory, had chosen love over comfort? And in trying to take his children from the woman he loved, Iris wasn't honoring his memory. She was destroying it. A knock at the door. "Come in." Walsh entered. The detective who'd found Clara, who'd served the papers, who'd set all of this in motion. "Mrs. Montgomery, I wanted to speak with you before we reconvene." "What is it?" Walsh sat down across from her. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, tracking people, serving papers, reuniting families. And in 15 years, I've learned one thing. You can't make people love you by taking away what they love." "I don't understand." "Those children love their mother. I've seen them together. The way Finn watches out for Rose. The way Rose runs to Clara when she's scared. The way Clara looks at both of them like they're her entire world. That's real. That's family." Walsh pulled out his notebook. "You hired me to find your grandchildren. I did. But here's what else I found. I found a boy who's brave and smart and fiercely protective. I found a little girl who talks to rocks and believes in goodness. I found a mother who'd rather live in a shack than lose her children. And I found a community that's rallied around them because they see what you can't." "What can't I see?" "That you're trying to fill the hole your son left by taking his children. But it won't work. That hole will still be there. And you'll have destroyed a family in the process." Iris's hands shook. "Then what do I do? How do I live with losing him?" "You don't live with it. You live through it. And maybe, just maybe, you let his children teach you how." When court reconvened, everyone took their seats, expecting a battle. Instead, Iris Montgomery stood before the judge could call for testimony. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement." Judge Thornton nodded. Iris walked to the center of the courtroom. She looked at Clara, at the empty seats where Finn and Rose should be, at the community packed into every bench. "I came here believing I was saving my grandchildren, believing their mother couldn't provide what they needed, believing money and opportunity mattered more than anything else." Her voice broke. "But I watched Mr. Morrison propose to Mrs. Parker, watched him kneel in front of her and offer his whole heart. And I remembered my son doing the same thing 5 years ago. Jonathan knelt in our parlor in Boston and told me he was going to marry Clara with or without my blessing. I told him he was making a mistake. I told him she wasn't good enough. I was wrong." Tears streamed down her face. Jonathan chose love. He chose a hard life in Montana Territory because it meant being with the woman he loved. And he was happy. Even at the end, even working a dangerous job, he was happy because he had Clara and Finn and Rose. She turned to Clara directly. I blamed you for his death. Told myself if he'd never met you, he'd still be alive. But the truth is, without you, he might as well have been dead. Because the life I wanted for him was empty. Safe, comfortable, and empty. Iris's voice strengthened. I'm withdrawing my petition. The children belong with you. They always have. The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton didn't bother calling for order. She just smiled and banged her gavel once. Petition withdrawn. Custody remains with Clara Parker. This case is dismissed. Clara collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Jacob pulled her into his arms while the whole courtroom cheered. Iris walked to their table slowly. Mrs. Parker. Clara looked up, eyes red. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for what I put you through. Clara stood. For a moment, the two women just stared at each other. Years of grief and anger and fear hanging between them. Then Clara did something no one expected. She opened her arms, and Iris walked into them. They held each other and cried while the courtroom watched in stunned silence. Can I meet them? Iris whispered. My grandchildren, not as someone trying to take them, just as their grandmother. Yes, Clara said. Yes, of course. They found Finn and Rose at the boarding house. Martha's sister had been keeping them distracted with cookies and stories, but the moment the door opened and Clara walked in, both children ran to her. Mama! Clara dropped to her knees and pulled them both close. We won, babies. We won. We get to stay together. Forever, Rose asked. Forever. Finn looked past Clara to Jacob standing in the doorway. Is it true, what we heard, that you asked Mama to marry you in the courtroom? Jacob nodded. It's true. So you're going to be our pa, if you'll have me? Finn walked over and looked up at Jacob with serious gray eyes. I already got a pa. He's dead, but he's still my pa. I know. I'm not trying to replace him. Good. But I reckon I got room for someone else. Someone who ain't my pa, but who looks after us anyway. He held out his hand. Jacob shook it solemnly. Deal. Then Finn did something that broke Jacob's heart in the best way. He stepped forward and hugged Jacob tight. Thank you for saving us. You saved me first, son. Rose tugged on Clara's dress. Mama, who's that lady? Everyone turned. Iris stood in the doorway trying very hard not to cry again. Clara stood and held out her hand to Iris. Rose Finn, this is your grandmother, your daddy's mama. She's come a long way to meet you. Finn stepped protectively in front of Rose. You're the one who tried to take us away. I was, Iris said quietly, and I'm sorry. I was wrong. I let grief make me cruel, but I'd like a chance to know you, if you'll let me. Rose stepped out from behind Finn and walked right up to Iris. Do you like rocks? Iris blinked. I've never given them much thought. That's sad. Rocks are very interesting. I have one named Gerald. He's shy but wise. Would you like to meet him? Iris laughed through tears. I would love to meet Gerald. Rose took her grandmother's hand and pulled her toward the table where she'd arranged her rock collection. This is Gerald, and this is Margaret. She's proper, and this is Samuel. He's brave, and this is Beatrice. She's the queen of the ants, but she's also a rock. It's complicated. Iris knelt beside her granddaughter and listened to her explain the personality of every single rock with complete seriousness. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight on her chest lifted. 6 months later, the church in Redemption Valley was packed again. But this time, it was a wedding. Clara walked down the aisle in a dress Martha had sewn simple white fabric with lace at the collar and cuffs. Finn walked beside her, solemn in his role of giving his mother away. Rose scattered flower petals with such enthusiasm that half the congregation was covered in them by the time she reached the front. Jacob waited at the altar in his best suit, the one he hadn't worn since Matthew's funeral. But this time, he wasn't saying goodbye. He was saying hello to a new life. Reverend Crane performed the ceremony with a smile so wide it threatened to split his face. Do you, Jacob Morrison, take Clara Parker to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Parker, take Jacob Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride. He did. The church erupted in applause. In the front pew, Iris Montgomery cried happy tears beside Martha Jenkins. The two women had become unlikely friends over the past months, bonding over their shared love for Clara's children. The reception was held at Jacob's ranch. The house that had been a tomb for 3 years was now full of music and laughter and children running through rooms that echoed with joy instead of grief. As the sun set, Jacob found himself on the porch with Finn. "You happy?" Finn asked. "Happiest I've been in years." "Good. Mama deserves happy. We all do." "Yeah, we do." They stood in comfortable silence. "Finn, I wanted to ask you something." "What?" Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Your daddy's boots, the ones you wore when you came to my door. I had the cobbler cut them down, make them into something you can actually wear. Thought you might like to have them for special occasions, weddings, graduations, things your daddy would want to be there for." Finn opened the box. Inside were the boots resized, restored, still clearly his father's, but now fitting a 9-year-old boy. "You did this for me." "I did." Finn pulled out the boots and held them like they were made of gold. "Thank you, Jacob." "You're welcome, son. I know I said I already got a PA, and I do, but I reckon a boy can have 2 people looking out for him, one in heaven, one right here." Jacob's throat tightened. "I reckon he can." Christmas came to Redemption Valley with snow and cold and the kind of bright clear skies that made everything look clean. At the Morrison Ranch the house was full. Clara cooked a feast with Martha's help. Finn and his friends built a snowman that was taller than Jacob. Rose named the snowman Frederick and insisted he needed a scarf so he wouldn't get cold. And sitting in the parlor by the fire, Iris Montgomery held her granddaughter on her lap and read a story about a brave little girl who talked to animals. Jacob watched from the doorway. His house, his family, his life. On the mantel sat 2 photographs, one of Sarah and Matthew, forever young, forever loved. And beside it, a new photograph. Jacob, Clara, Finn, and Rose on their wedding day, all 4 of them smiling, the past and the present side by side. Clara came up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking about? How a year ago I was counting days until I could stop pretending to be alive. And now I can't imagine being anywhere but here." "It's a good here." "It's the best here," Rose called from the parlor. "Papa Jake, Grandma Iris, says you know a song about a mockingbird. Will you sing it, Papa Jake?" The name hit him square in the chest. He looked at Clara. "I'm a terrible singer." "I know. Sing anyway." They walked into the parlor together. Jacob sat down in the chair Sarah had loved. Rose climbed onto his lap. Finn sat on the floor by his feet. Clara and Iris and Martha arranged themselves on the sofa. And Jacob, who hadn't sung since Matthew died, who'd spent 3 years in silence, opened his mouth and sang the lullaby about the mockingbird. His voice cracked. He forgot half the words, but nobody cared. When he finished, Rose clapped her hands. "That was beautiful, Papa Jake. That was terrible, Rosie. No, it was perfect because you sang it for us." Outside, snow fell soft and silent on the land Jacob had thought would be his grave. Inside, a fire crackled, and a family gathered close. And on the mantel next to the photographs sat a small wooden horse carved by a 9-year-old boy who'd walked 2 hours in boots too big to save his sister. The boy who'd knocked on a stranger's door and asked for water. The boy who'd saved them all. The end.